Hello and welcome to the AI Guides podcast. I'm John Stroud, and as always, I'm joined by my friend Hanan.
Hey everyone.
And today, Hanan, we're going to talk about a conversation we had a little while ago based on an article that you've been writing and trying to help people make sense of what's happening in AI and just the evolution, like how things keep changing. And what I really liked about it is you had these three phases to understand how things are evolving. So we're going to get to that in a minute. But first of all, there is one term that people should have in mind. Like if they're a business owner and they're just trying to understand AI, and that term for today is context. What's context and why does it matter?
Yeah, so just to kind of give an analogy, for years we have thought about AI models as a kind of like a model that many people have is kind of a super powered encyclopedia. They are pre-trained on vast but ultimately static library of public information from the internet. And the crucial limitation is that this encyclopedia is closed. It knows nothing about for instance, if you're a business owner, it knows nothing about your company's meeting last week, your current sales figures, or your internal processes. And by itself, the AI has no knowledge of, your world of your business. So context in a modern business sense is the bridge that connects the AI's powerful reasoning ability to your company's live, private, and specific world. So it's a mechanism that allows the AI to access and understand the information that exists outside of its original training or what it can pull from the internet. So without this bridge, the AI remains a clever outsider, but with more context, it becomes a valuable insider. Is the way that I would put it.
Okay, so uh, the AIs like ChatGPT, it would know something about like very big companies like Coca-Cola if there's tons of information about it on the internet, but only in general. It wouldn't know about Coca-Cola sales and so forth in the last quarter, and certainly not about a small business, right?
Exactly.
Oh, okay. So that's context. And people definitely have the sense, like when I talk to business owners, that it's changing so quickly and it's hard for them to keep up with what's going on. So we want to simplify that for them in these three moves. So the first move, and probably where people started to notice AI in their daily life, is 2022, 2023, when ChatGPT comes out, and it's a real wow moment for people. So, like, why was that such a big deal?
So basically when the original ChatGPT came out, you just had to, and it wasn't a wow moment for everyone, but I would say it got some people on board and other people, it wasn't like they weren't very convinced that it would be very useful because there are a lot of issues. There are all these news stories about hallucinations, but
Sure.
but yeah, so the first one was the original ChatGPT. That was the original language model that became really widely publicly acknowledged and used. You just had a model and you asked it a question, and it was trained on some data, and it would answer based on its cutoff window that it was trained on. So it was like having an incredibly knowledgeable assistant who could answer general questions really well. For example, you could ask it to read this contract and give me an opinion on the liability clauses, and it could synthesize information from its training data to provide a general legal perspective or summarize key historical events or whatever your question was. So these early LLMs were limited to the data that they were trained on, and they couldn't access the real-time information or perform actions in other applications, and they only knew what they were trained on up to a particular cutoff window.
Great. So if you wanted that, if you're a business owner and you wanted like an unofficial legal opinion, it would do that because it had an understanding of what the law was. But, if it was trained on it wasn't trained beyond a certain date. So it just didn't know. It was blind to all that information. So how do you go from move one, just having the large language models? What's move two?
Yeah, so I think the move to is coming back to getting more context, because these existing systems couldn't access the specific information beyond what they were initially trained on. So that's where the next evolution of these AI systems was to start connecting them to other systems and accessing real-time factual information. So this is when tool calling really took off, around the end of 2023 and the beginning of 2024. The breakthrough was discovering that you could teach LLMs to call arbitrary pieces of code. This would allow them to connect to external systems. So instead of just relying on memorized data, the AI could ask a database, a spreadsheet, or some internal system. This is when RAG became a really popular term. And so this meant that it could answer questions like how much are we actually spending more on salaries this quarter, because you could hook up your database to an LLM, or it could query the HR system. For example, like what customers are listed in my CRM with outstanding invoices, by pulling the data directly from your customer relationship management software. So this is when AI really became a real thing, and people started to began to see real business values just beyond just, a really glorified autocomplete that could write emails for you or correct your grammar.
Okay. So first move, you got this really smart computer that's trained on like all this information on the internet, but it's blind to like what's going on and what's new. And so people say, okay, so we're going to take that large language model from phase one, and then we're going to tack onto it. We'll allow it to communicate with certain tools, like through your database or maybe your CRMs or your HR system. And so it can reach out in all of these little these ways to get new and accurate information from a reliable source, and that way it could answer better questions for you. So that's great. Is now my smart pre-trained model has access to like all of these reliable sources of information in my database.
Mhm.
What's the problem with that, and what's move three?
Yeah, so the core limitation before we get to move three is that you have all of these different LLMs. So you have to choose between what LLM you want to use. And some people, for some individuals, that can just be a hard choice to make. They can, because there are many options.
Like
Uh,
what?
like for
Like,
example, you have a stateful ChatGPT models, but you have a bunch of models. You have 4.0, you have 4.0, and by the time I probably list the models, and then someone watches this video, there will be a bunch of new ones. But they're your standard kind of suite of models, such as Claude, Gemini, and ChatGPT.
yep.
And you have all these different LLMs, and you have all of these external tools that you want to connect your LLMs to. And every time, for example, your database, or if it's some API that you're using, it could be Slack, it could be your Slack channel or whatnot. And every time you wanted to stitch a tool with an LLM, you had to rewrite that functionality, because each LLM had a different structure for the piece of code for that interaction, and it was having to write in a lot of different languages. For example, you imagine if every time you wanted to write a new integration, you had to switch the language between French and German and so forth. So building these agentic systems involve a lot of coding and hard coded pieces for each application specifically. And it really, you had to really hack together these integrations. And so it created this kind of n times m problem, where you have a bunch of applications and you have a bunch of integrations, and you want each of these, oh, and you have a bunch of like LLMs as well, and it just depends on the number of dimensions you want to look at this. But integrating all of these different, every time you want to switch to your model, you have to rewrite these different integrations for all of these different services that you wanted to use, and that can make the problem really really challenging.
Oh,
Um, yeah.
okay. So yeah, you did use one expression that maybe some people haven't heard before, N times M. What's that?
Yeah, so basically it's just a way to like parse out the two dimension. So basic it's just very inefficient to kind of to give a very simple definition. It's imagine you're speaking a bunch of different languages and you're also or you have a bunch of different models. Let's just be very specific, and you also have a bunch of different integrations. And each of these integrations has to be specifically integrated with a bunch of those models or the applications. And every time you switch the model, you have to write a new set of integrations for each of those same applications. So if you go from, if you're like, actually, I want to use Gemini instead of my ChatGPT, but if you had hard coded the logic or your functions specifically for the OpenAI API, now you have to switch that API into the Gemini model. Now there are services that kind of build on top of this and they make this process easier, but still there's still you're still going to have to do engineering work to kind of switch. Anytime you have to switch, there's a cost. And yeah, so that's kind of the end times end problem.
So in the phase one, we get a large language model. It's smart, but it can't get access to new information. So we say, well, we're going to figure out a way that it can connect with all of these reliable and up-to-date sources, but every time you're connecting, it's a different language. So it's French and Portuguese and Italian. And so we're at the United Nations of all of these different languages. And so certainly for a small business, that's hard to figure out of like how many different things do I have to figure out to solve this problem. So it's technically possible,
Hmm.
but it's hard, it's complicated. So
Yeah.
what's the fix for that?
Yeah, well, there are many fixes, but one potential fix that we're talking about in this chat is something called a model context protocol. And essentially, MCP, or as it's known as Model Context Protocol (MCP), provides a standard. It's a standard protocol, kind of like how HTTP works. And I'm sorry if this is a bit too technical, but in the web, there's a standard protocol, the way that your web pages can get information and request information. So MCP tries to create an equivalent standard and for applications to talk to each other that are powered by LLMs. So instead of needing unique hard-coded integrations for every single AI model and every single business every single business application, MCP creates a universal adapter layer. An analogy that you'll commonly hear is kind of like a USB-C plug for LLMs, and the analogy kind of works both ways, where you can have a USB-C device that has a USB-C port, so you can plug in all sorts of devices to your MacBook or whatever USB-C device that you have, or you can with the same port you can charge it, but you can also plug in your phone or whatever. So, but vice versa, a USB-C plug can be plugged into various different kind of sockets. So it's the same kind of analogy. It's not a perfect analogy, but I think it kind of helps build the picture.
Right. And so it takes what was complicated before of the LLM trying to communicate with your databases and whatnot. Instead of having all of these different systems, everything can go through an MCP and it just standardizes the communication. And so many more things will be able to talk to one another if they're just all going through this one point. Is that fair?
Yeah, exactly. So instead of needing a unique hard-coded solution, we can basically MCP gives a universal adapter layer. And so now once you have an MCP server for a service that you could build yourself, for example, or generally it's going to be built by
Yeah.
other entities, like for example, Gmail has an MCP server, or Slack, or HubSpot. Any LLM that speaks MCP can seamlessly connect to it and use that service's functions without needing any sort of custom development for each pairing. So it just becomes really easy to stitch together, much like downloading an app on your phone for functionality. You don't need to recreate every time you want to use an app. You don't need to recreate that app yourself. You can or stitch together various integrations. You can just download Gmail on your phone, and then now it's seamlessly connected, and you can send emails. It's the same idea for LLMs.
So when you say easy, there's a difference between easy for you and easy for me. So are we at the stage where it's easy for you or easy for me?
I would say the biggest hurdle for non-technical people is figuring out which client to use and which servers to connect it to. Most people are familiar with ChatGPT, but it doesn't yet have an easy user-facing integration for MCP servers.
Yeah.
There is one for Claude. I would say that's probably the easiest one if I had to name one for people to use, but I think you have to be on the paid subscription. You have to be one of
Yeah.
the users. Now that could change, any day. Um, but yeah, connecting often requires a few technical steps. Again, this is also subject to change. But right now, if you wanted to hook up an MCP server, it requires getting it generally requires getting some sort of API key for the service that you want to use. For example, if you want to use Slack, you need to get the API key for it. And also it involves copying and pasting some sort of configuration code that you may have to configure. So I would say that these barriers are temporary and they're likely to be gone in the next couple of months.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, right now you do need a little bit of a technical finesse.
So I think it's fair to say, like, for today, if I wanted to do it, if I'm using Claude, this is a very solvable problem for me with a little bit of effort. And down the road, we fully expect this is going to happen on ChatGPT and Gemini and whatnot. So like, that's just where the trend is going.
Exactly. I think that is where I think that is where the trend is going. Today, you could probably do it with a bit of finesse. You could probably ask Claude to
Sure.
help out with your integration too, so he could. But in the future, I feel like will be highly integrated. And the thing is, there already exists a lot of integrations. For example, in ChatGPT, you can connect it to your Gmail or your Google Docs automatically.
Yeah.
But they're limiting the number of integrations that you
Yeah.
can have access to. And MCP just kind of opens the floodgates where anybody can create an app and you can connect it to your system.
Perfect. And so just picking up on that idea of the floodgates. So we had our phase one, you got a smart LLM, but with a cutoff. And then in phase two, we're connecting it to all of these different things, but we got a language problem. We've got all these different languages. And then MCP comes along and it's like a translator at the UN that it just allows everything to connect to, so it's easier for things to communicate. So that means more and more context for our large language model. So when you start to think about that, like what does it mean for a business to have a large language model that has access to so much more context today and in the future? What's the upside?
Yeah, I would say the biggest upside is it just the your AI application layer is just going to have a lot more context and is going to understand your business better because it can tap into the more integrations you give it, the more the tools it can tap into. It can connect with your Slack, so it has context of what we were talking about this morning. It can tap into your HubSpot. It can tap into whatever database you're using, depending on what privileges you give it, of course. So it just has a better understanding of your business.
And it's amazing what it'll be able to do, but in terms of like the potential for a small business, this is not something that's out of reach. This is like a little bit of hard work and you can set some of this stuff up, right?
Exactly. So in like previously, you can still get the context in, but you would have to copy and paste it in. And if you've copy and pasted your exact, if you got a CSV file output from your database and you upload that to ChatGPT and then you have to kind of prompt it properly to read that CSV in and parse it. It's just a lot more painful and the barrier is just a lot harder. And
Yeah.
MCP just kind of removes that barrier where you already have an integration. You just ask the question, and it knows where to look, and it knows what table to pull, and what month you were looking for, and it can just integrate. It just makes that barrier a
Yeah.
lot more easier.
So even if you're someone like me who's not super technical, but going forward for your business, you can have a really smart large language model like ChatGPT, and it can be made even smarter by all of the context of very specific information from your business. It's going to be able to combine them, and it's going to happen in a way that's not that technically hard to set up. So you now have access to this really smart agent that knows a lot about your business. So that's the opportunity. Is there any risks that you think people should keep in mind, like as they're thinking about working towards setting up a system like that?
Yeah, I would say this is a pretty open area, and I would guess this is probably one of the reasons why OpenAI hasn't launched their MCP kind of app store yet, is because the primary area to be careful is around data security and confidentiality, especially when dealing with your business's sensitive information. So as AI tools integrate more deeply with your internal data via MCP servers or whatever your service you're using, they become a huge security risk if not managed properly. So you need to control the permissions at each level, ensuring that only authorized individuals and the AI itself have appropriate access to the confidential files and database records, especially when you're talking about like HR systems and things like that, and also the API responses.
Perfect. Okay. So, takeaway for people is LLMs are smart. The more context that they have about your business, the smarter they'll get. And just because of the way the technology is evolving, they're going to have more access to more context about your business. And so this is a great opportunity for small businesses to really leverage this new technology. Anything else?
Yeah, no, I would say that maximizing your leverage with AI isn't just about the model itself, but it's about the ability to connect to your live data. So as we're concluding things, stop thinking of your business documents and data as just records, and start seeing them as the fuel for building actually useful AI systems that are valuable to your employees.
That's perfect. That's great. Okay. So until next time.
Awesome. See you next time.